I stood at the frosted window, the glass trembling slightly from the distant sound of fireworks exploding in the night sky. The yard was covered in untouched snow, glittering under the streetlights like millions of tiny diamonds. From inside the house came the faint echo of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the unmistakable smell of roasted turkey and sweet pies. The world inside was warm, golden, alive. But I wasn't part of it. I had lived in this house for over 30 years, raised my son here, fixed every broken pipe, built the porch with my own hands. Yet on this New Year's Eve, I was nothing more than a forgotten shadow. They told me I would just get in the way, that I should stay quiet, maybe watch television in my room. But when I peeked down the hallway earlier, I saw the long dining table crowded with family and friends. There was no chair waiting for me. The cold draft slipping through the window frame seemed to whisper the truth I had been denying for years. I wasn't welcome anymore. My son had grown into a man who barely looked me in the eye. His wife, my daughter-in-law, smiled at me politely in front of guests, but when we were alone, her words carried the sharp edge of resentment. And my grandchildren, they barely noticed me. To them, I was the old man in the corner, the relic of a past they didn't care to remember. The clock on the mantelpiece inside was counting down. In less than an hour, the world would welcome the new year. Inside, they would raise glasses, kiss, and cheer. And I didn't even have a glass of champagne. I pulled my sweater tighter around my shoulders. It was the same red knitted sweater my late wife had given me 20 years ago, back when the holidays still felt magical. I could almost hear her voice teasing me about how it made me look like a walking Christmas ornament. That sweater was the only warmth I had left tonight. I stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The air bit into my skin, sharp and unforgiving. I leaned against the wooden fence and stared at the windows glowing with golden light. My family's silhouettes moved inside, laughing, toasting, hugging. My chest tightened. For the first time in my life, I wondered what it would feel like to spend the new year completely alone. Then, as I turned to walk toward the gate, I heard the lock click behind me. The back door had been shut. Not just shut, locked. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. My son's voice echoed faintly from inside. "Don't let him back in. He'll ruin the mood." The words hit harder than the winter wind. I froze, my breath hanging like smoke in the air. My own son had locked me out on New Year's Eve. I stood in the snow, trembling, my heart hammering in my chest. And in that moment, one thought burned brighter than the fireworks above. This night will change everything. The snow was falling harder now, tiny flakes swirling in the wind and stinging my face. I stood outside the locked door, my hand still gripping the cold handle as if my stubbornness could force it open. But deep down, I knew they weren't going to let me back in. I wasn't part of their celebration anymore. Through the frosted glass, I saw the shadows of my grandchildren running around the living room. Their laughter was sharp, cutting through the night. I remembered when I used to build snowmen with them in this very yard, when they would beg me to tell another story by the fireplace. But tonight, they didn't even notice I was gone. To them, I was just background noise, the old man who had outlived his usefulness. My daughter-in-law's voice carried through the walls. She was telling a story, probably about her new job or their upcoming vacation. People clapped, laughed, and praised her. Then I heard my name mentioned, followed by muffled chuckles. I pressed my ear against the door. "He's too old to understand half of this stuff," she said, her tone light, but cruel. "Better if he just stays quiet. He's always so gloomy, it ruins the holiday spirit." The guests laughed, raising their glasses again. My son didn't defend me. He never did. Instead, I heard his voice join hers. "Yeah, Dad's just tired all the time. He doesn't enjoy parties anymore." I clenched my jaw, my breath fogging up the glass. Tired? I had worked 40 years without a single break to keep this family afloat. Every board in this house, every nail hammered into its walls, carried a piece of me. And now, the son I once carried on my shoulders spoke about me as if I were a burden. I stepped back from the window, my boots crunching in the snow. My chest ached, but I swallowed the pain. I wouldn't let them see me cry. Not tonight. Not when the whole world was celebrating. The street was quiet except for the sound of fireworks echoing in the distance. I walked to the gate and leaned against it, staring up at the sky. The stars were hidden behind heavy clouds, and for a moment, I felt as though I was the only soul left in the world. A sudden gust of wind reminded me just how cold it really was. My fingers burned, my nose was numb, but I didn't want to go back inside, not if I had to beg for it. I had too much pride left, even if it was the only thing I still owned. Then I heard the back door creak open for a second. I turned, hopeful, but it wasn't an invitation. It was my grandson, holding his phone, laughing as he pointed the camera at me. "Look, Grandpa's freezing out here," he shouted to the others inside. His friends laughed from the doorway, the cruel sound echoing across the yard. Before I could say a word, the door slammed again, and I was alone once more. I stood frozen in place, my breath heavy, my heart breaking in a way I hadn't thought possible. My own blood had turned me into a joke, entertainment for their holiday. And then, in that unbearable silence, I made a decision. I didn't know what it meant yet, or what I would do, but I knew one thing. I would not be forgotten. The laughter from inside the house faded into a dull hum, muffled by the walls and the snow-covered yard. I stood there, numb, staring at the closed door that separated me from my own family. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, long summer nights fixing the roof with my son when he was just a boy. All of it felt like a cruel illusion now, something distant and irrelevant to the people inside. I walked slowly around the side of the house, the crunch of snow beneath my boots the only sound in the cold night. I passed the living room window, where I saw them raising their glasses. My son's arm was around his wife, the two of them smiling as if they had built this life alone. My seat at the table, the seat where I used to carve the turkey, where my grandchildren once sat on my lap as we pulled Christmas crackers, had been pushed aside to make room for someone else. A neighbor, maybe, or a new friend of my daughter-in-law. It was then that I realized I hadn't lost just a chair. I had lost my place in this family. I pressed my hand against the icy brick wall, steadying myself. My heart pounded as if it were trying to fight its way out of my chest. For years, I had excused their distance. I told myself they were busy, that times had changed, that maybe I was expecting too much. But tonight stripped away every excuse. It wasn't about time or busyness. It was about choice. They had chosen to push me out. The sting of betrayal settled deep in my bones. My son, the boy I once shielded from winter storms under this very roof, now laughed about me with strangers. My grandchildren, who once ran into my arms, now pointed cameras at me to mock my loneliness. My daughter-in-law, who I welcomed like a daughter, spoke of me as if I were an embarrassing burden. And what was I doing? Standing outside, shivering, waiting for scraps of warmth like a beggar at his own door. No, that would end tonight. I don't know what changed inside me at that moment. Maybe it was the fireworks lighting up the sky, reminding me of the fire I once carried inside. Maybe it was the ghost of my wife, whose voice I could almost hear urging me not to let them crush me. Or maybe it was simply the last thread of pride holding me together. Whatever it was, I knew something inside had broken, and something new had been born in its place. I would not beg them for love. I would not knock on that door again. They thought they could erase me, laugh at me, cast me out into the cold like an unwanted guest. But they had no idea who I still was, what I was capable of, or how deeply a wounded heart could fight back. The bells from the town square rang in the distance, announcing that midnight was approaching. Fireworks shot into the sky, brilliant colors exploding above the rooftops. Cheers erupted from inside the house as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. I could hear their voices shouting, celebrating, as if the night were perfect. But for me, this was no celebration. This was the night everything ended. 7, 6, 5. I stepped back from the window, pulling my coat tighter. The snow crunched as I turned toward the gate. 4, 3, 2. I gritted my teeth, a quiet vow forming in my chest. 1. Fireworks exploded above, and the world erupted with cheers. Inside, glasses clinked and voices sang. Outside, in the freezing dark, I whispered to myself, "This is the last New Year I spend forgotten. They will remember me." The cheers inside the house echoed faintly through the walls, blending with the crackle of fireworks bursting in the sky. I turned my back to the warm glow of the windows and stepped into the empty street. My boots sank into the fresh snow, each step heavy, deliberate, as though I were leaving behind not just the house, but the last fragile thread that bound me to it. The night was brutally cold. The wind cut through my sweater, and my breath came out in ragged clouds. Still, I kept walking, passing houses adorned with Christmas lights, each window glowing with warmth and joy. Families gathered around tables, children pressed their faces against frosty glass, eyes sparkling with excitement. Everywhere I looked, there was laughter, togetherness, the kind of comfort I once believed my family would always give me. But not tonight. Not anymore. I stopped beneath a street lamp, its pale light reflecting off the snow like shards of glass. My hands trembled, whether from the cold or from anger, I couldn't tell. I leaned against the metal pole, closing my eyes for a moment. My wife's voice came back to me again, soft and reassuring. "Promise me, you'll never let them forget who you are." I opened my eyes. No, I wouldn't let them forget. As I walked farther, the streets grew quieter. The festive sounds faded into silence, replaced only by the crunch of my boots and the distant whistle of the wind. My legs ached, but I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was still alive, still capable of more than what they thought. I reached the old town square, where a small group of people had gathered despite the bitter cold. They were strangers, men and women with tired faces, some clutching paper cups of coffee, others huddled under blankets. A few of them glanced at me, and I realized they were like me, the forgotten ones, the invisible souls left outside while the world celebrated. One man, his beard frosted with snow, offered me a nod. "Cold night," he muttered. "Colder than most." I replied, my voice rough. He gestured to a bench, and I sat beside him. For a while, we said nothing, just watched as fireworks painted the sky. I felt oddly comforted among these strangers. They didn't laugh at me, didn't mock me. They simply existed, like me, carrying their unspoken stories in silence. But as the minutes passed, a thought gnawed at me. This couldn't be my life, drifting among shadows, forgotten and discarded. No, I had given too much, sacrificed too much to vanish into the night like a ghost. I stood, brushing the snow from my coat. The others barely noticed, lost in their own worlds. My decision burned like fire inside me. If my family wanted me gone, if they wanted to treat me as nothing, then I would show them exactly how wrong they were. I turned back toward my street, the path glowing faintly under the moonlight. My steps quickened, each one fueled by something stronger than bitterness. It wasn't rage alone that carried me forward, it was purpose. As I reached the corner near my house, I stopped, my breath sharp in the cold air. The windows still glowed with laughter and light. My family was celebrating, their voices spilling out into the night. And I, standing in the shadows, whispered to myself, "They think this night belongs to them. But before it ends, they'll learn it belongs to me." I didn't plan to come close to the house again that night. Pride and the cold had pushed me away, and for some hours I wandered the empty streets like a man unmoored. But as the hour grew late and the fireworks finally died down to distant pops, something pulled me back. Not hope, exactly, but an aching need to know what had replaced me at that table. I crept to the side of the house where the hedges were thick and the ground was softer. The moon painted the snow a sickly silver. It muffled my steps. Through a slim gap in the curtains, I could see the living room, a warm pool of light and voices. They were closer now, softer, intimate, the kind of talk that only happens when people believe themselves safe. At first they spoke in fragments, laughter, toasts, the clink of a glass. Then my son's voice grew clearer, low and satisfied. He was speaking to his wife. I could see them leaning toward each other, their faces flushed with wine and triumph. My stomach contracted. "And with the sale, we'll finally be free," my son said. "We can move to the city, start fresh. He won't even contest it. He's too old, and the paperwork will be simple." My chest went cold in a way the snow had not. "Sale? Free? Paperwork?" My daughter-in-law's voice, all polite venom, answered, "We'll talk to the lawyer in the morning. Once Dad signs the transfer, there's nothing he can do. Assisted living will be perfect for him. He'll be looked after, and we won't have to keep up this house." My hands, numb from the cold, gripped a branch until my knuckles ached. I thought for a dizzy moment that my mind had tricked me. Then I heard the soft rustle of paper as someone pulled out an envelope. There it was, the thin, decisive sound of plans being made, of futures being decided without me. They laughed, toasting the imagined freedom. My son leaned back, careless. "We just need the signatures." He's confused half the time. He won't understand what he's signing. The lawyer said it'll be straightforward with the right witnesses. A hot, bitter laugh escaped me, not from mirth, but from a kind of sorrow I had never allowed myself to feel before. All those years of work, the roof I'd replaced after the storm, the hours I'd spent fixing the heating when the pipes froze, the mortgage fights and the late shifts, everything that had built this house and kept their lives steady, reduced now to a line on a legal form and a neat paragraph labeled transfer of property. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, watching their silhouettes blur. The room felt smaller than ever, their voices distant and clinical. My son's shoulders were relaxed. My daughter-in-law's smile was a practiced arc. For them, I was an obstacle to be removed. For me, the house contained more than wood and plaster. It held half my life, every wound and every small victory stitched into the floorboards. My breath was loud in my ears. For a moment, I imagined storming in, shouting, ripping the papers from their hands. The fantasy was brief and foolish. I was neither young nor strong enough for that theatrics. But underneath that imagined fury something colder, steadier formed. A plan not of noise and spectacle, but of patience and precision. They would not see it coming. Tomorrow, my son said, we meet with Carter. By noon, it settled. The word tomorrow landed like a stone in my chest. I stepped back into the shadows, every muscle taut. The yard felt enormous and empty. My hands found the edge of the gate and tightened around it, as if it were the only thing keeping me tethered to the world I'd built. They had made their choice. They had decided my fate while I watched from the dark. There was no turning this into a misunderstanding. This was deliberate, planned, a quiet theft of my life dressed as kindness. The promises I had made to my wife, the small vows whispered in exhausted rooms years ago, rose up in me like a living thing. I would not be shuffled off like a piece of furniture. I would not be erased with a pen. If tomorrow they wanted signatures, then tomorrow would be the beginning of their reckoning. And as I stood there, the first thin line of smoke from a distant bonfire curling into the sky, I felt something settle over me, not the numbness of defeat, but the steady cool of resolve. They thought they'd closed the door on me for the night. They didn't know I was already making plans to open a different kind of door, one that, when it swung wide, would let truth and consequences walk through. The snow whispered around my boots. I walked away, each step measured, and thought only one thing, tasting it like iron on my tongue. Tomorrow, they sign papers. Tomorrow, I begin. I barely slept that night. My mind spun with images of papers being signed, of my son's careless smile, of my daughter-in-law's cutting words. Each sound from the house above me echoed like a hammer in my head. By the time the first light touched the snow, I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. I slipped into the kitchen quietly, the house still heavy with the silence of sleeping guests. On the top shelf, I kept an old wooden box my wife had left me. I pulled it down, my hands trembling, and opened it on the table. Inside were receipts, old mortgage documents, and a folded piece of paper with her handwriting. If anything happens, don't let them push you aside. Call Thomas. He'll remember. Thomas Carter, a friend from the mill, a man who had left town years ago. I found his card tucked between papers, the edges yellowed with age. On the back, a phone number written in my wife's hand. My chest tightened as I dialed. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't connect. Then a rough, familiar voice answered. Henry? My God, it's been decades. I told him what had happened. Not every detail, but enough. The locked door, the laughter, the talk of selling the house. He listened in silence, and when I finished, his answer was steady. Don't sign anything. I'm coming today. We'll make this right. For the first time in years, hope flickered inside me. My wife had been right to trust him. Maybe I wasn't as alone as they wanted me to believe. I brewed tea, letting the kettle whistle, and for a few minutes I felt the house breathe with me again. Every corner carried my life, my work, my sweat. No paper could erase that. Then, outside, the crunch of tires on snow broke the quiet. A black SUV pulled up by the curb. A man stepped out. Not my son, not anyone I knew. He moved with calm authority, glanced at the house, and slipped something into his coat pocket. He looked up, met my eyes through the curtain, and gave the smallest, most deliberate smile. 3 sharp knocks rattled the front door. I set my cup down, my heart pounding. Morning had only just begun, and already the game had changed. The knocks were steady, not impatient, not aggressive, just 3 calm raps that carried weight. For a long moment, I didn't move, my hand frozen on the edge of the table. Whoever stood outside knew I was here. That smile through the window hadn't been accidental. I walked slowly to the door, each step echoing in my chest like a drumbeat. My fingers hovered over the handle, and I hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, I opened it. The man was tall, dressed in a dark coat dusted with snow. His hair was silver at the temples, his jaw sharp, his eyes clear but unreadable. He wasn't young, but he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who never needed to shout to be heard. "Mr. Marlowe?" he asked, his voice calm, almost polite. "Yes," I answered cautiously. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather folder, flipping it open just enough for me to see a gleam of official paper. "My name is Daniel Price. I represent Carter and Associates." The name hit me like a spark. Carter. Thomas. My friend had promised he would come, but instead he had sent someone in his place, someone professional. Daniel offered a faint smile. "Mr. Carter received your call early this morning. He couldn't leave the city just yet, but he sent me ahead. He asked me to make sure you're not left vulnerable." I stepped back, letting him into the hall. The warmth of the house contrasted sharply with the winter clinging to his coat. For a moment, I almost felt embarrassed by the faded wallpaper, the worn carpet, the small cracks in the paint that I had always meant to fix. But Daniel didn't look around with judgment. He looked with the precise eyes of a man searching for details. We sat at the kitchen table, the old wooden box still open between us. He glanced at the papers, the deed, the letter from my wife. His expression tightened slightly, but he said nothing for a while. Finally, he tapped the deed with one long finger. "This is good," he said. "It's in your name and your wife's. They can't transfer it without you. But I assume they'll try to pressure you, maybe confuse you, maybe put papers in front of you that look harmless." I nodded, my throat dry. "They planned to meet a lawyer today. They said by noon it would be settled." Daniel's mouth curved in a faint, humorless smile. "Not if I have anything to say about it." For the first time in days, I felt a strange relief. Someone was on my side. Someone who wasn't family, who didn't see me as a burden, who didn't laugh behind closed doors. Still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing fear in my gut. Why would Thomas help me after all these years? I asked softly. Daniel looked at me steadily. "Because he owes you, and because your wife asked him to. Some debts last a lifetime." The words sank into me like warmth. My wife's voice echoed in my memory, that gentle certainty she always carried. "Don't let them make you small." Before I could respond, footsteps creaked on the stairs. My son's voice called groggily from above. "Dad, are you up already?" Daniel closed the folder, his eyes sharp now. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Remember, Henry, you hold the deed. Don't sign anything, not a scrap of paper. Let me do the talking." My son's footsteps grew louder, approaching the kitchen. My heart pounded, torn between fear and a quiet, simmering strength. And as the doorknob to the kitchen turned, I knew. The confrontation I had avoided all night was about to begin. The kitchen door swung open, and my son stepped in, rubbing his eyes and stifling a yawn. His hair was a mess, his shirt untucked, the look of a man who had celebrated too hard the night before. He stopped dead when he saw Daniel sitting across from me, the leather folder on the table between us. "Dad?" he muttered, blinking. His eyes darted to Daniel. "Who's this?" I opened my mouth, but Daniel spoke first, his tone smooth, professional. "Daniel Price. I represent Carter and Associates." He rose slightly, extending a hand. My son hesitated, then shook it stiffly, suspicion already creeping across his face. "Carter and Associates?" my son repeated, his voice tightening. "Why would?" Daniel cut him off politely, but firmly. "Mr. Carter sends his regards. He couldn't come in person this morning, but he wanted to ensure Mr. Marlowe here was not pressured into decisions against his best interests." My son's jaw clenched. "Best interests? This is a family matter." Daniel didn't flinch. Family matters often spill into legal ones. And when they do, the law speaks louder than sentiment. I watched the color rise in my son's cheeks. For years, I had seen that look. The look he gave me whenever he thought I was being difficult. But this time, I wasn't standing alone. "Dad," he said sharply, turning back to me. "What's going on here? Why did you call them?" I swallowed hard. My voice was low but steady. Because I heard you last night. I know what you plan to do. His eyes flickered, just for a second. Guilt, quickly masked by anger. You must have misunderstood. Daniel leaned forward. I think he understood perfectly. You want him to sign this house over to you. By noon, wasn't it? The kitchen air froze. My son's lips parted, but no words came out. Then the sound of heels clicking on the floor cut the silence. My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway, her robe tied tightly, her eyes sharp and calculating. What's all this noise? She asked, then spotted Daniel. Her brows shot up. And who's this? Daniel didn't miss a beat. Legal counsel. Her expression faltered, just for an instant, before she masked it with a polite smile. Oh, I see. How unnecessary. She moved closer, placing a hand on my son's arm as if to steady him. Her voice was syrupy, coaxing. Henry, you know we only want what's best for you. The house is too big, too much for you alone. You'd be happier somewhere with people your age, with care. We just want to take that burden away. Her words might have sounded gentle to anyone else, but to me they were sharp as broken glass. I clenched my fists beneath the table. Daniel's voice cut through her performance like a blade. Mr. Marlowe is not a burden. He owns this property, legally and fully, and he will remain here as long as he chooses. Any attempt to coerce him into signing documents will be considered fraud. For once, silence fell in the kitchen. My son's jaw worked, his wife's smile froze. They weren't used to being challenged. Finally, my son muttered, Dad, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I straightened in my chair, feeling something rise in me I hadn't felt in years, strength. No, I said quietly. You are. This is my home, and I'm not leaving. Daniel closed the folder and slipped it into his coat. His calm presence filled the room like a wall between me and their schemes. I suggest you cancel your noon appointment, because from this moment on, you'll find Mr. Marlowe isn't nearly as alone as you thought. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. My son looked at me, his eyes burning with something between anger and fear. And in that charged silence, I realized the balance had shifted. For the first time, they didn't see me as weak. They saw me as someone who could fight back. The kitchen stayed silent for a long moment, the only sound the slow, deliberate tick of the wall clock. My son's eyes shifted from me to Daniel, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words he couldn't quite spit out. My daughter-in-law stood rigid beside him, her smile gone, replaced by the cold gleam of calculation. Finally, she broke the silence. So you called in some lawyer friend, Henry? That doesn't change the fact that you're old. And this house is too much for you. You can't even shovel the driveway without help. Her words stung, but they didn't pierce the way they used to. Not with Daniel beside me. Not with the knowledge that Thomas Carter still remembered me, that my wife had believed I was stronger than their scorn. Daniel's voice was calm, almost casual, but it carried an edge of steel. Mr. Marlowe is not as alone as you assume. Mr. Carter has a long memory and a long reach. He asked me to remind you of that. My son frowned. Carter, you mean that guy from the mill? He's nothing. Daniel raised an eyebrow, the faintest hint of amusement in his eyes. Nothing? Carter and Associates employs over 200 people now. They build half the developments in this state. He didn't forget the men who stood by him when the mill collapsed. And one of those men was your father. I felt my breath catch. 200 people. Developments across the state. I had imagined Thomas had done well for himself, but not like this. Not enough to send a man like Daniel in a black SUV before dawn. My son shifted uncomfortably, and my daughter-in-law's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not pity, not disdain, but unease. Daniel continued, his voice measured. Mr. Carter instructed me to ensure Henry retains everything that belongs to him. This house, his accounts, his dignity. And he has the resources to make certain of it. Do you understand? The words landed heavy, like stones dropped into still water. My son looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to see the father he thought he'd buried under years of neglect. His gaze slid away quickly, unable to hold mine. I sat a little taller. The shame I'd carried all night began to shift into something new, something solid. Invisible. That's what they had made me. But now invisibility was my weapon. While they laughed, while they whispered, I had been listening. And I had allies they couldn't see coming. My daughter-in-law finally spoke again, her tone sharper now. So what? You think some old friendship means you can cling to this house forever? Do you really think Carter will waste his time fighting your battles? Before I could respond, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on her. He already is. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't heavy with shame. It was charged, unstable, like the air before a storm. I looked at my son, at the woman who had turned him against me, and I felt something inside me harden. They had tried to erase me, to treat me like a burden. But now they saw I was more than that. I was a man with history, with friends who hadn't forgotten, with strength they had underestimated. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own home. I felt present, seen, dangerous. And as the clock ticked toward noon, I realized the real fight hadn't even started yet. By late morning, the house no longer felt like mine, but like a battlefield. My son paced the living room, his phone glued to his ear, speaking in short, tense bursts. My daughter-in-law hovered nearby, whispering sharp suggestions every time he paused. The children had been sent upstairs, their laughter replaced by the faint thrum of music through closed doors. I sat at the dining table, the same one they had once pushed me away from, and for the first time in years I felt steady. Daniel stood near the window, watching the driveway like a sentry. The leather folder never left his hand. Carter's lawyer is bluffing, my son muttered into the phone. We'll move forward anyway. A pause, then his voice rose, frustrated. I don't care what he says, we have a meeting at noon. We'll sign. He can't stop us. When he hung up, Daniel spoke, calm but direct. You should know, your father holds the deed. Any attempt to move forward without his consent will collapse in court before it even begins. And Mr. Carter will make sure the court sees every detail. My son spun toward him, anger twisting his face. You don't understand. We've invested time, money, plans depend on this house. Daniel's gaze didn't waver. Plans built on theft rarely stand. The words struck deep, and for a moment my son's eyes faltered. But then my daughter-in-law slid to his side, her hand on his arm like a snake coiling tighter. Don't listen to them, she hissed. He's old. He doesn't need this house. We deserve it more. We'll fight if we have to. Her words were meant for him, but I heard every syllable. For years, I convinced myself she simply didn't like me, that it was small things, my habits, my silence. But now I understood. She had been waiting for this moment, pushing, manipulating, shaping him into a man willing to betray his own blood. I rose slowly from the chair, my knees aching but my voice steady. This house was built with my hands. Every nail, every board, every night I worked myself raw to keep the lights on. You think you can erase me with a pen? You'll find the ink doesn't hold. My son opened his mouth, but before he could answer, the crunch of tires outside drew everyone's attention. Another car. Daniel looked out the window, then turned back with the faintest smile. Right on time. A sleek sedan rolled into the driveway. The engine cut, and a man stepped out. Broad-shouldered, his coat sharp, his stride purposeful. Even after 30 years, I knew him at once. Thomas Carter. My breath caught. He hadn't just sent Daniel. He had come himself. The front door opened, and suddenly the room felt smaller. Thomas filled it with his presence. Older, yes, but with the same fire in his eyes I remembered from the mill. He took one look at me, then at my son and his wife, and his expression hardened. Henry, he said warmly, clasping my shoulder. You look just the same. Stronger than they think, I'd wager. My son stammered. Mr. Carter, this is a misunderstanding. But Thomas raised a hand, silencing him with ease. I don't deal in misunderstandings. I deal in truth. And the truth is this house belongs to Henry. Always has. Always will. Any attempt to take it from him will be met with the full weight of my firm and my memory of every favor this man ever did for me. The silence that followed was deafening. My son's face paled, my daughter-in-law's lips pressed so tight they were bloodless. I sat back down, my heart pounding not from fear but from vindication. For once, I wasn't the forgotten man in the corner. I was the center, the one they couldn't ignore. And as the clock struck noon, I realized this was only the beginning of their downfall. The weight in the room shifted the moment Thomas spoke. My son, who had strutted and shouted the night before, now looked like a boy caught red-handed. His wife tried to hold her composure, but the tremor in her jaw betrayed her. Thomas placed his coat neatly over a chair, his movements unhurried, deliberate. "Henry," he said, turning to me with a nod. "Your wife was a wise woman. She knew there might come a day when you'd need help. She made sure I'd be there if it ever came." His words struck like a bell in my chest. She had thought of this. She had believed in me, even when I stopped believing in myself. Daniel handed Thomas the leather folder, and together they laid the papers out across the table. Mortgage receipts, deeds, proof of ownership, evidence that couldn't be dismissed with laughter or hidden behind polite cruelty. My son shifted uneasily. "We weren't trying to steal anything," he muttered, his voice thin. "We just thought Dad would be better off in a place where—" Thomas cut him off with a sharp glance. "Better off where? Locked out of his own home. Mocked on New Year's Eve? Don't dress cruelty as kindness, boy. I've seen too many men try to disguise greed with good intentions." My daughter-in-law stepped forward, her voice sharper than glass. "You don't know our family, Mr. Carter. You don't understand how hard it's been. We've had to carry so much while he—" I rose before she could finish, my palms pressed to the table. My voice, though quiet, filled the room. "You carried nothing I didn't give you first. Every comfort you enjoy was built on my labor, my sacrifices. And when I asked for nothing but a place at my own table, you locked me out into the cold." Her face flushed red, but she didn't answer. Thomas leaned back, folding his arms. "I'll make this plain. If either of you pursue this plan further, I'll ensure every court in this state knows what you tried to do. Fraud, coercion, elder abuse. Do you want those words tied to your names? Because I assure you, they will be." The silence that followed was heavier than the ticking clock. My son's shoulders sagged. My daughter-in-law's eyes darted to him, pleading for defiance, but his resolve cracked under the weight of Thomas's stare. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen, not as a burden, but as a man whose worth had not faded with age. A man with allies. A man who still had a voice. Thomas turned to me again, softer now. "You don't have to fight this alone anymore. From here on, they'll know you're not forgotten." I sat back down slowly, the strength in my chest unfamiliar, but welcome. I had spent the night believing I was a ghost. But as I looked at my son, pale and silent, I realized I was more alive than I had felt in years. And though the battle wasn't over, I had already won the first victory. They were afraid of me now, not because I threatened them, but because they had finally seen the man they had tried to erase. My son finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse, his pride slipping like sand through his fingers. "Dad, maybe we didn't handle things the right way, but you have to understand, we were desperate. The bills, the kids, the pressure of keeping everything together. We just thought." "You thought wrong," I interrupted, my tone quiet but sharper than any shout. "You thought I was weak enough to sign away my life. You thought I wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. You thought being old meant being powerless." My daughter-in-law stepped in quickly, her voice honeyed, but the edge in her eyes betrayed her. "Henry, please, don't make this bigger than it is. We only wanted to make sure you're taken care of. We thought a retirement community would be good for you. Friends your age, nurses." I slammed my palm against the table, the sound cracking through the room. Both of them flinched. "Do not twist abandonment into care. Do not tell me being locked out in the cold was for my benefit. I know exactly what you wanted, and it wasn't my happiness." Thomas's steady presence at my side gave weight to every word. Daniel remained silent, watching like a hawk, ready to step in if they tried anything foolish. My son lowered his gaze, shame creeping into his features. But my daughter-in-law wasn't ready to surrender. "If you keep this house, then what? You'll live here alone until it falls apart? And when you're gone, who inherits it? Us. It all comes to us anyway. Why drag this out?" Her arrogance reignited the fire inside me. "Because it's not just a house. It's my life, and I'll decide what happens to it, not you. If you want to wait until I'm gone, then wait. But you will not take it while I still breathe." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Thomas leaned forward, his voice calm but deadly certain. "You'd be wise to listen. Henry has the deed, the law, and me. Any attempt to force his hand will end worse than you can imagine." My son's face crumpled. He looked between me and Thomas, and for once I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of punishment, but fear of losing everything he had gambled on. His wife's grip on his arm tightened, but he shook it off. "Enough," he muttered. "We'll stop." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What? You can't." I said enough, he snapped, his voice trembling. We went too far. The words stunned even me. For years I had been the one who bent, who yielded, who let silence replace confrontation. But now, it was my son who lowered his head, my son who backed away. For a moment, the house was still. The storm outside had quieted, leaving only the hush of snow against the windows. I realized then that this was more than just about papers or property. This was about dignity, about reclaiming the piece of myself they had tried to strip away. I straightened in my chair, meeting both their eyes. From this day forward, you will not treat me as if I'm already gone. I am here. I am alive, and I will not be erased. Their silence was answer enough. The house had never felt so quiet. My son and his wife stood frozen, their words spent, their confidence drained. I could almost hear the walls themselves breathing, holding the weight of everything that had just been said. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking into the silence. I was the one filling it. Thomas placed a steady hand on my shoulder. Henry, the decision is yours now. They've made their intentions clear. But you don't have to let their betrayal define you. You hold the deed. You hold the choice. I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the two people who had once been my family, now reduced to strangers wearing familiar faces. My son's shoulders sagged, his gaze flickering like a boy caught doing wrong. My daughter-in-law, however, still glared at me with a mixture of anger and fear, unwilling to accept defeat. I rose to my feet. My knees ached, but the strength in my voice carried me higher than I had stood in years. This home isn't just wood and nails. It's my life, my memories, my blood. I raised you here, I said, turning to my son. And when I'm gone, you'll inherit it the right way, not by trickery, not by greed, but because you'll have earned it through patience. He swallowed hard, shame reddening his face. As for you, I continued, looking at his wife, you will never again twist my age into weakness. I may be old, but I am not blind. I see what you tried to do, and I won't forget it. Her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes darting to the floor. Thomas added, his tone calm but commanding, Henry will remain in this house under full protection of the law. Any further attempt to coerce or pressure him will result in immediate legal action. Consider this your final warning. The words landed heavy, and I saw it, the shift in power. No longer was I the forgotten old man sitting quietly in the corner. No longer was I the shadow pressed against frosted windows. I was the one holding the ground, and they were the ones standing on shaking ice. For years they had dismissed me, mocked me, shut me out. But now, standing in my own kitchen, I felt something I thought I had lost forever, respect. Not freely given, perhaps, but pulled from them by the truth they could no longer deny. My son finally lowered his head. I'm sorry, he whispered, though the words were fragile, uncertain. I let the silence stretch before answering. Sorry doesn't erase what you did, but it's a start. If you mean it, then show it in how you treat me from this day forward. His shoulders sank further, but he nodded. His wife said nothing. As I sat back down, a wave of calm washed over me. The battle wasn't finished, not completely. Wounds like these don't heal overnight. But the tide had turned. For the first time in years, I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I was a man who had stood his ground and won. And as the clock ticked past noon, I realized this house was mine not just on paper, but in spirit once more. And they knew it. A week later, the town held its annual New Year's charity gala. It was tradition, a gathering of neighbors, business owners, and families to celebrate together and raise funds for the children's hospital. I had attended it years ago with my wife, back when our faces were familiar among the crowd. In recent years, I had stopped going, believing no one cared if I was there or not. But this year was different. Thomas insisted I join him. It's time they see you as I do, he said firmly. Not as an old man in the shadows, but as the backbone of this community. When I arrived, dressed in my best suit, the one I had nearly given away years ago, whispers rippled through the hall. People I hadn't spoken to in decades turned their heads, surprise lighting their eyes. Some smiled, some nodded respectfully. And when Thomas stood beside me, introducing me not as a burdened retiree, but as the man who had once saved the mill during its hardest winter, the room began to shift. Without Henry Marlowe, Thomas declared into the microphone, half the men in this room wouldn't have had jobs to feed their families that year. I owe him more than I can ever repay. And tonight, We honor not just the new year, but the man who gave so much without ever asking for thanks. The applause thundered, rising to a standing ovation. I froze, overwhelmed, my chest tightening with an emotion I could barely name. For years I had been invisible in my own home, and now strangers, friends long lost, and neighbors all stood to their feet for me. In the crowd, I spotted them, my son and his wife. She sat stiffly, her smile brittle, her hands clutched in her lap. My son's face was pale, his eyes fixed on the floor. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected to see me celebrated, respected, applauded. The mayor himself shook my hand, thanking me for years of service, for sacrifices that had kept the community strong. People came forward one after another, sharing stories I had long forgotten, small acts of help, words of advice, tools I had lent, repairs I had made. Each memory painted me not as a relic, but as a man whose life still carried weight. And as I stood there, listening, I realized something profound. My family's rejection no longer defined me. Their scorn had been loud, but the truth of who I was rang louder. I glanced once more at my son. His shoulders slumped under the weight of shame. His wife avoided my gaze entirely, her mask of control cracking. I didn't smile in triumph. I didn't gloat. Quiet victory was enough. They had tried to erase me, but here I was, standing tall, surrounded by people who saw me clearly, who respected me. When the applause finally died down, I leaned toward the microphone. My voice was steady, strong, and carried across the room. Thank you. I once thought my time had passed, that I had nothing left to give. But tonight, I see I was wrong. We never outlive our worth. And no matter how forgotten we may feel, our lives still matter. The room erupted again in applause, and I stepped back, my heart full. My family's betrayal had tried to bury me in silence. But now, in front of everyone, I had risen louder than ever. That night, after the gala ended and the last notes of music faded, I walked home slowly through the snow. The town lights glowed warmly behind me, the sound of laughter and cheer still carrying in the air. But inside me, it was quiet. Not the quiet of loneliness, but of peace. The house stood where it always had, its roof lined with icicles that sparkled under the moon. I paused at the gate, my hand brushing against the wood I had repaired a dozen times over the years. For the first time in a long while, I felt no bitterness toward it. This was my place, my fortress, and it would remain mine until the day I chose otherwise. Inside, my son and his wife sat at the dining table. They hadn't gone to the after-party. They hadn't said a word at the gala, and now the silence between them was heavier than any applause I had received. My son's shoulders hunched forward, his hands clasped tightly, while his wife's eyes burned with the shame she couldn't disguise. I took off my coat slowly, hanging it on the same hook it had always rested on, and moved to the fireplace. The flames were low, but steady. I stirred them gently, the crackle filling the room. Finally, my son spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad, I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile, trembling. His wife turned toward him in disbelief, but he didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on me, raw and searching. I nodded once, not cruelly, but firmly. "Sorry is a beginning," I said quietly. "But trust is something you rebuild, not with words, but with actions. If you truly regret what you did, prove it." He lowered his gaze again, and silence fell. His wife said nothing at all. She knew her mask had cracked too far to be repaired. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to seek revenge in fire or fury. Their shame was enough. Their own hearts had become their punishment, heavier than anything I could give. Later, when the house was dark and they had retreated upstairs, I sat alone by the fire. I thought of my wife, of her laughter that once filled these rooms, of her steady hand that had guided me even after she was gone. I whispered into the flames, "You were right. They won't forget me. Not now. Not ever." Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, covering the ground in a fresh blanket. A new year had begun, and with it, a new chapter of my life. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't forgotten. And as I sat in my chair, the fire warming my face, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: victory. Not loud, not cruel, but quiet and complete. Because in the end, the greatest revenge wasn't destroying them. It was simply living, stronger than their betrayal, and watching as their shame followed them long after the fireworks had faded.